I'm Katie Geminder. I'm currently a co-founder and chief of strategy at Scent.co. Listening to a bunch of the panelists already, I've also been through version 1, 2, and 3 of the web now. So, and worked in e-commerce and gaming and social media. My claim to fame is I'm one of 6 patent holders on destroying democracy. So, Facebook. In the newsfeed. And at Scent, we are a platform for anyone to make a creative income. So the idea of ownership for both creators and the people that like them is really important to me. So I'll let the rest of y'all introduce yourselves.
Thank you so much. My name is Nacho. I'm a musician, composer, and I'm also working on a project called Little Heroes. And we are doing basically a movie. But instead of creating a movie and then finding the audience, we launched an NFT and we created an audience and we raised money and then we are co-creating the movie with the audience we created.
My name's Taylor Wrobel. I'm an engineering manager at OpenSea currently until tomorrow. So that'll be a fun little change. Yeah, I mean, I've been more sort of boots on the ground, sort of fighting with the realities of developing in a Web3 world in a company that's been scaling massively for the last 8 months. So I think I'm going to have a bit of a different perspective here than some of the people sort of, driving decisions and ideas from the top down.
So I guess I don't know if I'm the outlier here or not, but I'm Carol Van Cleef. I'm a lawyer who's found that other hats also fit. So whatever hat you'd like to see me in, feel free to use it. I've actually been possessed with the concept, I think, of what's now being called Web3 since around 2005 with Second Life, and watching the evolution of Second Life over time. On multiple levels, in particular with respect to the payments issues. Today, I've been involved in all aspects of, I shouldn't say all, but many aspects of the crypto ecosphere, and have certainly been, I feel like I'm spending most of my time in the NFT world these days. And among other things, I'm on the advisory board for New Arca Labs, which has which is an NFT platform.
That was my first observation coming into into Web3, but is that lawyers love smart contracts. It's really fun. Okay, on the screen.
Hi.
Hi.
I'm Primavera Filippi. I guess I'm another outlier because I'm a legal scholar as well. I'm working at the CNRS in Paris, and I'm faculty associate at the Berkman Center at Harvard. And it's been pretty much like since 2013 that all of my academic research is about investigating the legal challenges and opportunities of blockchain technology. And then I'm also, as the other side, I'm also a blockchain artist, and I've been doing blockchain-based life forms since 2014, which was pre-NFT. So this is actually like physical pieces of sculpture that are associated with blockchains, and that now are generating NFTs. And the idea of the art piece was to actually go and illustrate the legal challenges that blockchain technologies are bringing into the world.
Thank you. So I think when it comes to ownership, it's really interesting to me because it's not one-sided, and especially with the secondary market. So owning an NFT, both creating it, being the owner of the creation, and then purchasing NFTs. And I think that there's a lot that we could just jump into there. Anybody want to start? Taylor, go.
Sure. Yeah, I mean, I think one of the big things that we're seeing as a sort of shift in the NFT space is more of a drive towards utility. For a long time, NFTs were sort of more akin to photographs. So sort of one of my best explainers for sort of how NFTs gained the notoriety that they have is when photography first became an art, it became very difficult for photographers to actually monetize that. You were able to print off infinite numbers of photos once you have a single negative, and if you're able to make many duplicates of something, how do you actually make money out of it? And they ended up doing this by doing limited prints and signing them and sort of giving it that sort of notoriety themselves as the artist, as the creator. And we're seeing that in the NFT space now as well. And it's sort of interesting because now that sort of notoriety carries over through secondary sales. where that signature sort of, for a lot of people, you wouldn't resell photos. You wouldn't have a secondary market at all for photos. It was sort of, you had this sort of feeling of a relationship between the photographer and the purchaser of their art when they signed it. But now that notion is there. That's been the history of NFT for a while, but we're seeing a sort of move to a desire for more utility, to sort of owning the NFT, meaning something beyond just the ability to resell it, meaning access to, you know, creators and, you know, communities that you wouldn't have access to otherwise, whether that be Discord channels, whether that be, you know, private concerts being run by artists who create NFTs and sort of push out to their sort of more limited community and seeing it become more of a social club. So you're seeing, you know, not just the utility or not just the value of the art itself, but also the utility that comes with it in terms of access and in terms of prestige and like the club membership aspect of it.
Yeah, I think it's very interesting the moment we are, because I think we are kind of in a transition from the creators economy to the ownership economy. And from a creator's perspective, I think it's very interesting because right now, if you, let's say you want to use the song from Justin Bieber, for example, in a movie that you are doing, it's really, really hard to use that song for many reasons. First of all, maybe a song like that is composed by 3-4 people. Each of them might be in a different publisher. You have to reach out to each of them. Then you have to check out with a record label. That's another entity. Then you have to check with Justin Bieber, and then you have to probably the producer or someone else. So it's really hard to make that happen. So that's why they created one-stop shops where you can basically only buy from a single shop where they are the owners both of the composition and the recording. But these people don't care at all about the creator, and basically
Publishing?
yeah. So basically, they don't care about the creator, and they basically take a cut between 30 and 50%. They pay you 6 months later. They decide maybe you are an artist that cares about the environment, but they end up using your music in an oil company or whatever. So I think all of those issues can be solved with smart contracts and with NFTs.
Yeah. I'd love to hear your take on the NFT side.
Well, I have a few, but I think there are challenges, obviously. So ownership, first of all, NFTs are wonderful because the imagination is truly the only limitation that exists here. And because of the technology, I should say, sometimes the technology is not quite where it needs to be to deliver on what the imagination would like to create. But to the extent that it is, then the question is that when you do, you know, it's one thing, there's a set of issues for the creators to be concerned about, and there are also there are issues for the purchaser. And so I tend to look at both of those kinds of issues in terms of what are the exposures and how do you as a creator and as an owner reduce your risk to make sure that you know what you're getting is what you think you are getting. And that's probably the biggest challenge with the growth that we've had in this space over the past year, with some of those marketplaces really exploding in activity, to really get a handle on how we can make this an orderly process, even with the code that is supposed to ensure that we do have an orderly process.
Yeah, and I think, and Primavera, I'm curious to hear what you have to say about this, but in the media, NFTs seem there's a real problem that we have where it's a specific example that's given every single time, and it has to do with either a crypto kitty or whatever. And NFTs can be anything, and you kind of hit on this, that it can be physical, experiential, digital, a haiku, a picture. And from the law perspective, Primavera, how do you think about that? And just the concept of how it's being represented.
Yeah, I mean, so I think there is like an important distinction to be made between like how we talk about NFT in the art content world, or are we talking about NFTs as like asset-backed tokens and so forth. I think the interesting legal challenges comes when you're associating the NFT with a particular piece of content, and there is usually this assumption that by purchasing the NFT, you also acquire some kind of rights into the work that you get. Some NFTs do actually have specific licenses that are providing some rights of like using the pictures that you've purchased into your social media or into your virtual worlds, etc. But many of them don't. And that means that when I purchase an NFT, I'm actually only and exclusively acquiring a token that has a reference to the hash of an actual digital file, but I do not actually acquire any of the rights into, and I don't get any license into the rights. And some platforms are, of course, providing some rights. Some of the NFT creators are providing additional rights, but by default, you don't get those. And I think there is another issue that is that I think needs to be tackled and has not been fully tackled yet, and is the fact that most of those licensing terms are actually defined at the level of the platform. So because I purchased a CryptoKitty or because I purchased an NFT on Super Rare or Foundation, then I can read the terms of use and I know what are the rights that I get with this NFT. But those terms of use are defined in a centralized manner by those platforms, and there is no connection within the NFT of which one of the rights that are associated with it. And that's a problem, because that means that the platform could at any moment modify the terms, and all of a sudden the NFT that I have purchased while thinking that at that time I had the right to, I don't know, use the image that I've purchased commercially. If the platform changed the terms of use, then I cannot do that anymore. And I cannot prove that at the time in which I purchased it, I actually had acquired those rights. So I think for me, like in the NFT space, there is still this missing element of how do we actually encode the IP rights of the content that the NFT is associated with directly into the token. So that by just looking at the token, I know exactly what I can do and not do. And whenever I transfer this token to someone else, that person can also verify by just looking on the blockchain at the token what are exactly the IP rights associated with it.
And I think that's a really big issue, is that especially when you're buying an NFT, do you really know what you're getting? And it is a complicated analysis that you've got to look at the terms of use and, what is the platform, the marketplace promising you when you're buying it, but actually what is in that smart contract, in that code. Interestingly enough, I spent some time last week at that other conference in New York City, and I saw a couple of interesting proposals that or products that are out there that are coming into the marketplace that may help address some of those issues. I think the real question I have is whether the purchaser is going to take the time and will actually look to see what is being promised in that smart contract. What am I actually buying? So I think it's a two-way street, is that we need better communication from the marketplace side, and how do we get people to pay more attention to the disclosure aspects?
Yeah, I think what Carol is saying is very important, because it's not inherently good or bad if you own or not the IP of the asset that you are buying. It depends on what's the strategy, and each scenario has a different pros and cons. Basically, you have examples like Bored Ape, where you are actually owning the IP. Then you have examples like Doodles, when you can basically license your NFT up to $100,000, and then after that you have to find a deal with them. And then you have other projects like ours, for example. We don't give the IP to the buyers, and the reason is because we are doing a movie, and we are interested in having control of, if we want to use those characters in the movie, we need to make sure that we can use actually them and not have to ask 100,000 people. And the interesting thing is that it depends on there are different scenarios. So basically distributing the IP can be interesting in terms of more people building your brand, but at the same time, that can be challenging for your project, because there's not a cohesive story on how your brand is going to look like. So I think it's a very interesting model worth exploring, both distributing the IP and not distributing the IP.
Yeah, I think a lot about provenance for art, and in fact, I was working with an artist who was starting to build provenance directly on the back of his physical art to show where it was created and who owns it now. But I think there's also something to, we were talking about this briefly, about the secondary market and what it means to, first of all, the value of something is subjective. And so expectations that people have, the guy who bought the Jack Dorsey tweet on my platform that tried to sell it for, what, $35 million, and he couldn't get $29,000 after paying $2.9 million. So, we're missing parts of the utility of recognizing what is in the metadata of these assets and who owns it and where are the entities that are going to track this going forward.
Yeah, I mean, I think in terms of secondary sales, it's been really interesting to see sort of the trend over the last 2 months or so in terms of sales of NFTs. So, people talk about the downturn in NFT sales recently, but realistically, the number of sales has been sustained or increasing on platforms like OpenSea. But the average price of those sales has been decreasing, which I think means that we're sort of getting past the point where the novelty is really what people are paying for. We're getting past the point where it's a new technology and people are jumping at it for that reason and that reason alone, and we're going to see, again, more utility coming up. I do think it's interesting that, in terms of ownership, the smart contracts really handle, or at least the exchange contracts that companies like OpenSea do, handle a lot of the notion of like monetary ownership. They have, built-in concepts of doing a royalty payout during transfers and having an original owner and having that provenance recorded. OpenSea recently authored a new smart contract for exchange called Seaport that they've open sourced. It's not an OpenSea specific smart contract, but it's open for anyone else to use. That is now sort of pluggable and dynamic. You can add your own extensions onto that of things that happen as that NFT changes ownership over time. So we're sort of seeing, this basic concept of just an item that you own, that you transfer and that you sell, to now being something that can have additional utility added in as those sales happen. So not just is there that trail of provenance, but also you can have augmented value over time as an NFT is sold or not sold or held onto. And what the future holds with that is sort of unknown, but the tools are starting to exist to allow people to take it in more interesting directions than just being a traditional marketplace.
Now, there are some risks. And this is where I spend a lot of my time, is in the world of criminal abuse. And the question is, to what extent is the current activity in NFTs being really a cover for criminal activity? And it's not something that we talk about a lot, but it's being watched very carefully by a number of different players in the law enforcement and the intelligence community. So it's something that, it may be one of those little dirty secrets, but we need to be airing it because it may in fact affect ownership rights. It may also affect your position as a creator doing that initial sale with the royalties that are going to follow from subsequent sales, as well as being a purchaser in the secondary market and a seller in the secondary market. It's the usual kinds of issues. I know everybody rails against the banks asking those so-called KYC type questions, but do you know who's on the other side of that transaction? Do you know who is buying your NFT, especially if you're getting royalties? And every time that NFT gets sold, let's say today it sells for $100, and maybe it's a art work, and the next sale is at 1,000, the next sale is at 10,000. This happens over a few months, and suddenly you as the artist are feeling really good because you're getting a piece of every one of those transactions. But what if your NFT is being used in a money laundering ring? So that's an issue. And then likewise, if you're buying something, do you have the certainty with respect to the marketplace that you're buying on that that you're not buying something that was created by somebody who's in Iran or somebody in Russia or North Korea? So these are the kinds of things that we also need to be putting into our calculus as we're thinking about these issues.
Yeah, I was having a conversation earlier today also about taxation. We need a tax lawyer up here. But just thinking about the obligation of the buyer and the seller and the buyer, even though in the metaverse those things shouldn't apply, but they do.
Well, I know that there's also some legal complications when it comes to secondary sales in terms of that's no longer a contract between the creator of the art and the person purchasing it. It's a contract between the person selling that has whatever rights they currently have to the art and the new purchaser. So I think there's still a pretty big open question in terms of how do those rights transfer through secondary sales, if at all. It sort of astonishes me that people don't put more licensing information into the NFT metadata. This spec has existed for a very long time. NFTs can just have arbitrary traits on them of really any type. We primarily see people using this to say, you know, it's got this color background and this face on this bored ape, and do sort of, you know, statistical analysis on top of that to calculate rarity. But you can use it for really anything. So I'm really surprised that we're not seeing more use of that NFT metadata to just say on the chain in the NFT what the licensing information is. I think Primavera had something
Yeah,
she wanted to say
go
to
for
that.
it.
Yeah. Yeah, actually, I wanted to jump on that because I completely agree. I find it quite surprising that no one has worked on such a standard. So we have created a little task force on NFT licensing, which is specifically addressing this question and is like creating like some standardized ways of communicating what is the license that is applying for the IP. To whoever holds the token. And to answer the previous question that you were saying is like, how do we ensure that the rights that are associated with the purchaser of the NFT gets transferred ongoing. So the way that we have identified a solution is actually to rely on the public licensing. So kind of like in a similar way that we have like GPL or we have like the Creative Commons licenses, but make them conditional to actually owning a particular token. Which means that the license is open to the public. It's not a personal license to a particular person, but only the person that actually obtain or has one of the limited edition of a particular NFT can exercise those rights. And in this way, it's no longer about like ensuring that there is a possibility of making sure that the rights is being transferred all along the line, because you just use one general license that is applicable to the work as a whole, and then an additional conditional license that provides additional rights, such as, for instance, the right of visualizing in your social media, the right of commercial exploitation, but that right is conditional to holding the token. And so the day in which you don't hold the token anymore and someone else does, then you can no longer exercise those rights, but the new token holder can.
So I have a question. At what price is this kind of protection going to come, embedding this into the NFTs? Is it going to add to the cost, either from the marketplace standpoint or the creator or the purchaser? And then second, what's going to be the trigger that's going to cause people to pay more attention to this?
Got an answer.
It may be totally rhetorical.
Yeah, I mean, in terms of you know, monetary costs, I honestly don't think that there's much. You know, I engineer here. I work a lot with open source software. Slapping a license on a piece of software is relatively easy. Making the wrong choice is more expensive. But adding that into the NFT metadata when you're first publishing seems like it'd be pretty straightforward. I think the real big thing is the way that like trait and property information is shown in marketplaces and displayed is critical. So you need buy-in from the marketplaces like LooksRare, like OpenSea, and you know, if we are able to basically understand that there is some well-established piece of metadata that, you know, designates what the license is, and we know how to extract that and how to render it, we could get that added as sort of a first-class citizen on the website. We do this with other traits right now. You know, numerical traits we show and allow filtering on differently than you know, keyword traits. So I think really the only limiting factor here is getting some platform buy-in and getting it exposed in a way that does put it in front of people's eyes. As you said, sort of hiding it somewhere within a metadata specification doesn't do much if nobody knows to look for it and nobody can find it.
Well, and the utility, you need a tool. I mean, a lot of creators don't have the ability to get in and modify that smart contract and know even what metadata is. And
And forget it when you come to the purchaser.
oh yeah, and it's very difficult right now, and even for me, I mean, it's brutal. Did you want to add?
No, I mean, I think it's I was with the guys from Ledger last week in New York, and they were talking about security and how important. Usually, people pay attention to security when it's too late, and I think this is something that unfortunately happens, that people start caring about their assets once they have their assets stolen. And similar things happen with IP, and you have to make mistakes. We are all learning in public, and I think it's that's the interesting thing about this moment, that this is the very, very beginning of a new phase in the internet, and we are here to make mistakes, to learn, and to change the world for the better, I think.
So this really should be called Web 2.5, not Web 3.
Yeah, there are a lot of overlaps between Web 2 and Web 3, and it's necessarily that because the infrastructure still is very, very poor in many aspects, and yes, there's definitely a 2.5 somewhere there.
Are there any questions from the audience? We've got 50 seconds left. Anyone else?
Well, I think I'd like to just add that I think we're at the point where the marketplaces in particular need as a group to come forward and start to exert some, a more, I was going to say focused, but yes, a focused approach to helping deal with these questions, because like we've seen in many other areas of the economy, of industry, et cetera, over time, is if you don't move fast enough, others will, and it'll come either from the government or from private sector, plaintiffs, lawyers, that type of thing. So time is of the essence in addressing a number of these issues.
And I think we're kind of at the beginning of a bear market, and financial cycles and product cycles not necessarily move at the same time. If you see what happened in 2008, most of the most important apps that we use today every day, Uber, Instagram, Venmo, Snapchat, etc., all of them were created in 2008, 2011. That was a golden period for Web 2, I would say. And I think this is the time to build, and this is a really exciting moment to be in the space.
Yeah, for sure. Thank you all for participating and for bearing with my last-minute moderation.